Good morning. It is March 10th, 2021, and in Texas, a very interesting date. As most people know, this starts a different perspective in our state with regards to mask and COVID-19. That's just an FYI. However, the venerable one, Kevin Lawrence from TMPA, has stated if your county is 15% or above with regards to COVID issues and hospitalization, you are still under the mandate of March 16th, 2020. We like to keep everyone updated in the goings on in the great state of Texas. Even though we have focused on that with Doug, Fred, Clay, Kevin, and myself, and others, we do want to talk because we are continuing what it has been termed and deemed the George Floyd Act in the state of Texas. There's also a similarly named piece of legislation that has passed the House in the United States Congress. So we'd like to get some differentiation with that before we get back into our policy focus in the state of Texas, just to give you perspective, because the name could be affixed to a lot of different legislation across the country, but in particular the United States and Texas. Do you want to, Kevin, give a brief overview, and then we go to Fred? How do we want to start that off?
I say we'll let Fred take point on that.
We go to North Texas, who's actually in Central Texas, and I hope, Fred, you and I can catch up this week. Again, I want to let the listeners know one of the things that has been a tremendous benefit from this with the African American lawyers section of the State Bar of Texas and law enforcement groups and associations across Texas is that we are building relationships. And when we find out that people and humans build relationships, things happen a lot smoother and better than the presumptions and assumptions that you can make from other groups other than yourself, and then try to come to a forced compromise. We're finding that that doesn't work well at all. However, sitting down, disagreeing, agreeing, and really telling the perspectives of individuals to understand them better, it takes time, and we started last June, July, and we're continuing because it is very important that we make progress and we make sustained progress. With that, Fred, appreciate you. And the George Floyd Act in the United States Congress has passed the House of Representatives. And so we wanted to at least reflect on that and give you some distinctions between legislation that's being considered as the George Floyd Act in the state of Texas.
And I hate to defer to Kevin because I'm having some audio difficulty in this room. Kevin, can you start this off while I get this setting fixed? Because I'm trying to get my Bluetooth setting to work back, and I can't get a second to fix it.
All right. Well, let us know when you're ready to go. Here, yeah. They are the state version of the George Floyd Act and the federal version are completely different pieces of legislation. The one thing that they have in common is the issue of qualified immunity. And that is the one that our members are asking about more than anything else. So whether or not that bill is going to come through the United States Senate in the same version as what came out of the House, we doubt that very seriously. We are obviously opposed to doing away with qualified immunity as these bills would suggest. We think that's bad public policy, and we will continue to lobby that direction. The other items that are in the federal statute, as Doug pointed out earlier, there's a lot of money put in there for training, for equipment, for body-worn cameras, for development of new policies of best practices. Some of the things that we've actually talked about in our conversations are in those bills. There are things that are already in effect. One of the few Trump executive orders that has not been rescinded by the new president is the order with regard to police reforms. So, you know, the issue of chokeholds, duty of care or duty to intervene, that kind of stuff is already addressed in a presidential executive order, and it is memorialized in the bill that did pass the House. Like I say, I think the qualified immunity is the most contentious issue in that bill as it currently sits, or at least the version that came out of the United States House of Representatives. But it's completely different from the Texas version.
And one thing in regards to qualified immunity, if I can explain from the legal perspective, when there's some type of injurious or critical scenario arising from an incident, qualified immunity allows that individual or its group to seek monetary damages against the subdivision in which that actor is affiliated with. And so at present, it has been created through the court system. So 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, judicial. You find qualified immunity in the judicial area of our checks and balances of the 3 branches of government. Interestingly enough, if you take what has been termed in case law, as lawyers and legal scholars would say, and you put it in the second branch of government in the legislative sense, you've now put it in law or statute with regards to qualified immunity. The interesting thing is, it's something that I've taken as a little boy all the way to now from my dad. The same thing that make you laugh can also make you cry. And that means that if you want to put qualified immunity in statute and take it out of the judicial branch and area, and it's not written in a way that it can support at times those who are affected adversely, you can actually have qualified immunity in statute that is used to block individuals because you don't meet the qualifications or the elements of qualified immunity. And you can have a trier of fact, a third party, whether it be a judge or a jury, say no every time you look to defeat qualified immunity to seek damages against that actor that is associated and affiliated with some entity or political subdivision. So you may not want to have it in statute as what you would think would be an assisting resource and tool in the legal bag, because it can also never be attained. And if the triers of fact don't believe that person or persons has attained the level to satisfy qualified immunity and meet all the elements, you will never win with regards to a case in qualified immunity, and you've actually taken yourself going the other way with regards to it. So if you have qualified immunity in the judicial sense, it's a case-by-case basis, which therefore allows the triers of fact to take that individual, those specific circumstances in those jurisdictions that it occurs. And until we can find something that may be statutorily balanced, and then we always look at a balancing test in law, you may not want to put qualified immunity in statute per se, because if the triers of fact tell you you never reach the elements to then assert qualified immunity, you may be shooting yourself in the foot and thinking you're doing something good for these individuals that bring suits, and you actually may be barring them statutorily.
So I'm going to try and interpret some of what Steve just said, because he thinks like a lawyer.
Well, my law school would be pretty happy to say that they got something in me in 3 years that they were supposed to, as I sat in those classes, sometimes stupefied for some of the things that they were saying. But nonetheless, basically, enacting a statute that you can never attain the levels to have it benefit you may not be the thing you want to do. Is that better?
I think some of the proponents of the current initiatives, the current, changes, they want to do away with qualified immunity. They just want to strike it down altogether. And we're not sure that that's even possible statutorily, because courts don't create law. Courts create precedent in their interpretations of the law.
Well, case law, and I'm not going to get into all that either, because this.
Well, I think it's important for the non-lawyers that are tuning in here is, the courts don't, they're not the legislature.
They should be interpreting what has been statutorily created in that legislative branch
and the Constitution. And so if we take issues like qualified immunity, and I think one that's easier for cops to understand is the exclusionary rule.
Okay.
The exclusionary rule does not exist anywhere in federal statute. The exclusionary rule at the federal level was gleaned from the Constitution by the United States Supreme Court. And, just like the Miranda ruling is gleaned from the Fourth Amendment by the United States Supreme Court. Now, some states have chosen to take that case law and put it into statute. The Texas version of the exclusionary rule is even more restrictive than the federal standard that was created by the Supreme Court. So here's where our issue comes in. If the United States Congress or the Texas legislature passes a law that says we're doing away with qualified immunity, the Supreme Court then has to look at that and say, wait a minute, we're telling you it's in the Constitution. The only way you can do away with it is to amend the Constitution, not amend your statute. So even if it passes, we think there's going to be some court battles yet to be heard. And I want to point something else out, and I think you did a good job, Steve. Qualified immunity is not absolute. It's not automatic. The word qualified means exactly what it says. It is under certain circumstances, the cities, the counties, the police, the law enforcement agencies, and law enforcement agents are entitled to a certain level of immunity as long as they are doing what they believe we have told them to do.
Right.
If the fault is ours, if the fault is in our system itself, that we haven't properly explained or trained to our officers what we want them to do, how can we hold them personally liable for not following the orders that we have given them? And that's what qualified immunity really boils down to. And it's granted, I finally saw some stats on this this last weekend. When qualified immunity is invoked by a defendant in a civil suit, and again, I want to point out, qualified immunity only applies to civil suits, doesn't apply to criminal.
It's monetary damages. It is not, we're going to lock you up,
only a
peace officer or law enforcement, because you are a bad actor or deemed to be a bad actor.
Right. Not in disciplinary actions. Cops can still get fired. Qualified immunity has nothing to do with that. But when it is invoked, when the defense says we are going to claim qualified immunity here, that is successful 57% of the time, and it fails 43% of the time. So again, it's not automatic. Cops are, in fact, can be and are sued every day all across this country, personally and through their agencies. So it does happen.
And interesting.
I was about to bring that up because we have an attorney here in Houston that has filed probably between 20 and 30 over the last 2 years lawsuits, going after our guys. And we all know that in reality, he's looking at the big fish, which is the city of Houston. So qualified immunity is kind of I don't want to say a misnomer, but it's not accurate when people believe that we cannot be held accountable. We go outside the scope of our job duties, we can be sued.
Right. And because as Kevin rightfully mentioned, it's a civil suit, you're looking at basically a tort claim. And a tort claim means, is there some negligence? Is there liability that can be found? And you have to determine some amount of damages. Because again, if there are no damages that occur, even if you have the elements of being successful in a cause of action, you're to be awarded, a lot of times you'll see things where a claimant will win and they'll have a nominal award. because really you've proven something, but the court has not deemed enough of a damage award, and you get a nominal award because, okay, you brought this lawsuit and you're correct. And so I don't think we've looked at that issue to really say, is this something we truly want? And I think litigators are starting to recognize that, at least in the state of Texas, that this may not be the time without truly delving into what this can do and what this means for folks. Because I think, and Kevin, I don't want to couch this the wrong way, but I believe we were looking at reforms so people don't get hurt and or critically injured when they have encounters with law enforcement. Money because of wrongful death or activity by law enforcement, I think in most people's minds are the secondary or tertiary rationales to protest or dissidents. It's, we don't want to be adversely affected by this group that has public safety as their primary concern. I'm not thinking, well, Officer Lawrence comes down and I have an altercation, man, that's 50 G's in my bank account. That's not how I think society wants to proceed. I don't believe law enforcement is going, oh gosh, I gotta concern myself with having to write checks to citizens because of lack of training. I think the real issue is, how do we create an environment where we do have public safety, where we don't have fear and trepidation, and we have trained professional peace officers acting in accordance of what the subdivisions and agencies from law enforcement would expect their officers, troopers, constables, deputies to behave when interacting with the community.
I think that's a very important distinction to draw. There are people out there who do see it this way, by the way. There are certainly plaintiffs' attorneys really want to see.
Right. Yeah, right. Can't argue with the plaintiff's bar. I get it. You see, look, Thomas J., and I'll just leave it at that, has done a tremendous job. The Hammer, if you want to go North Texas, he's done a tremendous job.
But we also have to appreciate this fact. Law enforcement officers are the folks that we hire, that we expect to go out there and enforce the laws that we have passed, but that our elected representatives, there has to be somebody who goes out and enforces the rules. Now I get it. We've got a pretty significant portion of our population anymore just doesn't think there ought to be rules at all. But as long as we still have rules, somebody has to enforce them. And as Doug has pointed out a few times, it's very seldom that we run across that individual who wants to go to jail, who wants to be arrested. I think I had one in my entire career. He would call himself in so he could go to jail every Friday night. But most people don't want to go to jail. They don't want to admit they've done something wrong. And they're in the middle of some very highly emotional state when we get there to start with. And so sometimes law enforcement, it's a violent occupation. We have to use force to overcome the resistance that's being offered while we're trying to do the jobs that we were hired and entrusted to do. People are going to get hurt. Saying that we're going to be able to sue an officer every time somebody gets hurt because the officer was simply doing their jobs is bad public policy, and you'll wind up with cops not doing their jobs or not taking the jobs to start with, and then we got a whole different set of problems we have to address. So.
And just to add to what Kevin said, we're in a situation in my agency, or my agency I just retired from. The director was on record as testifying a week ago. We have 360 vacancies. The governor's office has already announced that we have over 900 troopers that are eligible to retire in this next biennium. If that passes, you're going to see massive dumps in my agency.
We're seeing it already. We're seeing cops that they've already decided it's going to pass. It's going to happen. They're like, you know what? It's not worth it anymore. It's just not worth doing this job, which is part of why every agency that I know. I don't know one agency right now that is fully staffed that has more than, I don't know, 30 officers total. They're just not. And the only viable recruiting tool that anybody has right now is to go try to steal officers from other agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have an issue here right now. We're up just for the first quarter of this year, we're up 50% on retirements. They just come out with a report yesterday. We have a new system that can track exactly how many officers we have active. We have 5,140, which includes 67 cadets that are actually probationaries. They're on the streets, but they're training. 5,140. That's 300 less than we had in 98. 300 less.
And how much population increase over 20 years have you had in the city?
Easily over 500,000.
Absolutely, so you have.
Now our chief has got the brilliant idea that we're going to send guys that are administrative and investigators back on the streets once a week to supplement. We have some of these people who haven't been on the streets in 20 years. They've been doing admin jobs. We're down 1,100 civilian employees, so we had to backfill those with officers. I've got 4 that retired this week. I'm not doing it. I'm not going back on the streets. I hadn't been there in 20 years. I'm gonna get myself hurt. I'm going. And we're gonna have a lot more. We can lose 60, 70 officers easy in the next 3 to 4 weeks because they want them to do this. So where are we gonna get those bodies from? Because those positions will still have to be backfilled. So we're gonna end up down more than we're up.
Let me say this, a way, Kevin, that I think you can dispel the fact that you don't want law enforcement, that group. Take true, and this is going to be touchy, but take a couple of true criminal record individuals and put them in a nice room that you can watch with some upstanding citizens. Put them in that room and see what happens. I think they're going to say, we'd like to have some law and order. Because what you have created is a little microcosm of what happens if you have a society that has the bad guys and you, and nobody.
Well, they did that. They did that in
public
Seattle.
safety.
Remember, they created that 6 square block zone in Seattle. Look how it worked out for them.
Right. Didn't work out well. The other thing is, which is very practical, which you and I did in 2001. So 20th anniversary of us being able to sit down, thanks to Senator Armbruster and now Chair John Whitmire, and they had staff at a minimum sit down with the stakeholders and work things out. Being separate and apart and sending, I love technology, but without a face-to-face, without really looking at someone, you aren't going to get the best legislative initiatives on any level, city, county, state, or federal. And I've had the ability to work with 3 of those 4. So you don't want to do these things in silos and then kind of just talk over and send messaging back and forth. It takes this type of interaction to really get to the crux of, and listen, I recognize, as well as y'all do, people who feel offended because of goings on and transgressions. But I think we've pointed things out. They're not at the percentage one may presume because of media coverage. There are a lot of things in place that people don't know or recognize already exist. So a bad job of communication, which is always not a good thing. We've had folks on these calls that have been participants in studies to improve our society and the state, and y'all haven't even seen the conclusions of what y'all worked on. That is problematic. So we have a lot of, I think, just basic human things that can be cleaned up, and I don't even want to say taken and put right side up, but just if we took the time to actually categorize and get our house in order, There are a lot of things that probably half of these things, as you mentioned, could be done without laws, because there's a willingness from an administrative perspective. There are administrative things that Cole are going to be able to handle. There's training that everyone, I think, on this call from a law enforcement perspective has said would be an improvement, but we also need funding. And I think if we touched on those things, and also, again, you're going to hear from citizenry that think, X, Y, or Z about law enforcement. You're going to hear citizenry that think law enforcement with back to blue and things like that are great. We can't work from the edges. And that's where I think a lot of we do. We got to come in and sit down all at that middle spot at the table and figure out what's going on. What do we truly have already enforced? What do we truly have already in place? And I think we could drill down to a handful of things that would make a difference, and I think would be prospective in moving forward.
We have to appreciate the fact that there are, as you say, there are multiple forces at play here. There are people with all kinds of different perspectives of these issues, and what they believe the appropriate corrective measures are for whatever those issues are. And as you know, Steve, the heart and the soul of it for us is we're focused on what is good public policy. We are accused of trying to protect bad cops, and nothing could be further from the truth. There's nobody harder on bad cops than good cops. We don't want bad cops. They just make our lives and our jobs more difficult.
Kevin, I think what people want to see, and you, I don't think you have the magic to do it, is to foresee the bad actor, peace officer, before they make that bad action or inappropriate action. No one can do that. However, I think we've discussed, to a reasonable length, how you can look at possible past activity, categorize it, so you can look at, I think, rationally and reasonably, someone who may need to go back for training, or someone who's had some incidents that we know may not be the best person for all situations.
Right. Which is where what we keep referring to as due process comes into play. When law enforcement officers are accused of, suspected of wrongdoing, there should be a full vetting of those facts. There should be a complete and thorough investigation, and then there should be appropriate measures taken. Whether that is, like you say, remedial action, retraining, some sort of discipline that is not a termination, all the way up to termination, or prosecution if the actions call for it. Our argument is all that happens every day. Is it happening as good as we could possibly do it? No.
So therein I think lies the issue.
What's stopping us from doing that on a much more broad scale? What's stopping us from getting that done? And there's a whole bunch of obstacles.
Well, and I think the public sees grand juries excusing officers. And I think you get a point where you say, man, I just saw what happened, and this, no charge is going to be pressed. And you're right. It's not 500 cases, but it's 5 cases that people see ad nauseum.
But it's also 5 cases, Steve, that they don't have the people, the viewers, the general public, they don't have all the same details.
Understood.
Have. The only people that really have all the facts in front of them are the triers of fact. And
Understood.
I think it's a big part of our problem. A big part of our problem is the 24-hour news cycle. Social media has led our public, our viewing public, to believe they've got all the facts when they don't. And now they don't agree with the decision that came out because they don't have all the facts that the trier of fact has. And somehow, I don't know how we overcome doing away with grand juries or changing our criminal justice system doesn't change the underlying facts.
No, it doesn't. But does it? But how do you change some of the thought, and even worse, perception, that white cops get off from hurting black people? Because that, let's just get to it in that regard. If you see that enough times, like I said, from various news outlets, social media, you have now sensitized me to that degree. And that's why that was the prime purpose of saying we have enough intellect, Kevin, you, myself, our law section of the state bar, and other law enforcement entities to say we have to dispel these things that are going to really take us down rabbit trails or just create a great divide in our country. And then you couple that with some of the leadership and they get involved, right, wrong, or indifferent, whatever side you're on, media wise, social media wise, you have a firestorm all created on a lot of perception, not based truly on fact. And you create differences and animosities amongst groups. And
Right.
that's what we've seen.
And we're starting to see some more empirical data that is starting to come back out that is showing that those perceptions are in fact not true. We've posted a couple of those this week on TMPA's Facebook page and sent it out on our other social media and so on and so forth.
But you have to overcome that presumption.
We do.
And that's it has grown, unfortunately, in our perspective over the last several years because of those technological advances that don't get necessarily all the facts in play before things are said.
And it's as I am painfully aware, it's extremely difficult. Look how long it has taken to overcome the myth of hands up, don't shoot. We still haven't done it. There's still a significant portion of our population that is convinced that happened, but then there's a significant portion of our population that believes that all the lunar landings never happened. So I don't know how.
Right. And again, the issue is if that has happened, and I think y'all have been very open about, yeah, you know what? It may happen, but it doesn't happen at the clip and at the frequency. But again, I think the question becomes, if you start naming off names, people say, how much is enough? But again, when you start naming off names, and rightfully you have pointed this out, Kevin, some things do involve law enforcement and some things do not, but they all get melded into one pot because right. it is an offense against a group in the society. And we've made no distinction, but there are people in that group getting hurt. Now, again, laymen and folks that are watching news and social media don't have all the facts. They derive perceptions probably based on a 30-second clip, but that's real life. And we have to overcome those things as well. And that's why we have all said, if it takes how many weeks to get to a point to where we can have some things that make true change, then we're willing to come back every Wednesday until that occurs.
Agreed.
A lot of it is perception.
Yes.
And again, I looked to this, there was a deal I pulled up. It was a research study, and they give you the methodology and the findings and all this other stuff. But it says one of the things here was how many unarmed black men were killed by police in 2019. And the numbers that people believe versus reality is incredible. Most believed it was.
Even the most ardent supporters of law enforcement got that number wrong by a factor of 100%. It's yes. Amazing how distorted the public's perception is of the facts. Sorry,
the average believes it's 1,000 people a year. 1,000 unarmed black men are killed every year by police, and that's, I mean, to me, and that's by conservatives. Not, the liberals were in the tens of thousands. So
we don't have that many people. We're only 1 in 10. I tell people that all the time. If you put black people in all the best jobs in the United States that were qualified, we can't take over. We can't. There's not enough people. We just cannot do it. Anyway, I digress.
In 2019, the number was 13 people. Now it goes up to 27 if you count weapons other than
arms.
Right. If you say somebody with a knife is unarmed, then the number goes up. If you say somebody using a car trying to run over a cop is unarmed, if that's not a weapon, then the number goes up. But the number that were completely and totally unarmed, 13. But people believe it's in the thousands. And by the way, there's not thousands of people that die in contact with law enforcement total every year. The number is pretty consistently in the high 900s, low 1,000. It's always around that 1,000 number, total number of people. And as we pointed out, Steve, some of those are suicides. Some of those are people who die in crashes during a pursuit. Some of them are, a lot of them are drug overdoses. People who are about to get arrested and they've got their dope and they swallow it to try and hide the evidence and they wind up, dying. Those are all considered deaths during a police contact.
So Doug, what's the number, as you said, for white males or
53.
53?
Percent or yeah. I'm sorry, are we talking about percentages or total numbers?
I think
total number of unarmed white guys killed
in the same year was
in the same year. 53.
So 40 more. So 40
yes.
more.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Around. Yeah.
Okay. Approximation. Again, has anybody, as a former staffer that's in that committee, has anyone sat down as we approach putting together public policy so that we can see what's going on? And again, I'm sure if I'm sitting there as the committee director, I'm looking to say, well, I shouldn't have to have, and again, it's altruistic in a sense, but I shouldn't have to have anybody killed who's unarmed that shouldn't be killed. And I know y'all come up to the Capitol, and I'm sure there are members and staff that ask you those things. You can't protect against all situations at all times, but I think you have to give context to what we're talking about, because the policy is going to be driven either by hysteria or true fact. And if you get hysteria, you get some issues. And again, you have members on both sides of the issue with differing perspectives. And I think they all need to realize what is. And I don't think we've ever really had a clear determination of what is before we've initiated legislation in this regard.
Well, and again, you have to be careful what study you look at. I remember I sent you all the one that where they use statistics. Statistics show that 1 in every 1,000 black men in America will be killed at the hands of police over their lifespan. And it's like, how do you come up with those numbers? It's not accurate. I don't know how.
Did we ever, and that's something that maybe we can ask that statistician based on what? Is it a one city? Is it, a sampling of 4 cities, in different time zones? What is it that created this statistical, assumption or belief?
Stephen, I think you're hitting the nail on the head right there, and that is, we're not holding those people accountable. Right. And I'll give you the perfect example. When I say the name Heather McDonald, there's probably half the people listening to this are saying, well, she's in the back pocket of Fox News, so everything she says we're disregarding. Whereas I've read, I did part of my graduate work on racial profiling and the numbers just aren't there year in and year out. Those numbers Doug is giving you, if you look at those over a 5-year period, they're probably very consistent year in and year out with that percentage of white versus black deaths.
Is it that when we see a black person under distress, that it just is so egregious that we go, oh my gosh, this is
George Floyd. The last 9 minutes of George Floyd is what everybody is looking at. They're not looking at all of the video where the officers that are originally on the scene, what I've seen, they're telling him, hey, you look like you're in distress. Are you okay? I mean, they get him in a patrol car. A fight ensues on the patrol car, so they have to take him out of the patrol car. What's being the perception, which everybody is saying is reality, is that last 9 minutes of video.
Well, it's still a reality again, and Kevin and I think Doug have mentioned probably after minute 5. And again, I'm not trying to quote you, gentlemen. You probably would have sat the individual up.
Yeah, and again, that's training. That's okay. That's right. That right. We can say that individual, but in Minneapolis Police Department's defense, that's a justified method that they're using
but it could be improper at this time.
It could be, yeah.
And that's what we're trying to point out. That's probably an improper technique. If in fact, and I think you already said it, Kevin, Texas does not, I don't think, use that technique anymore, or is not taught or trained in that regard. And
I think most departments have gotten away from training that technique. The question is whether or not they have gone out and retrained all the officers that were trained in that technique to start with. And by the way, I'm not saying that I know that I would have in that case have set the man up. I'm just saying that me personally, I think at some point there was a duty to at least check in on him, a duty to reassess the situation. Is it necessary to continue in this particular, at some point you got to say, hey pal, how you doing down here? Are you okay? What's going on?
And we also have to understand that some departments aren't used to dealing with the same type of narcotics and the effects of those narcotics when they're dealing with a suspect.
Like, is that a training as well, Doug?
Most definitely, because I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, PCP come back around and they were dipping cigarettes or joints in bencyclidine, PCP. And if you haven't dealt with that and haven't dealt with someone on the effects of that, me and Joe Gamaldi got into a big argument one day over, the effects of PCP, because if someone uses it for a long period of time, they will have a different effect on the back end than a person that's just dabbling with it from time to time. And if you're not used to dealing with that type of person, you're going to think something else. You're going to think, oh, he's just intoxicated. He's not intoxicated. He's not on PCP. He's not the aggressive, where you've been just starting out on it. So they may not have dealt with fentanyl to the point that they knew what was going to happen when he ingested it. I'm not trying to be an apologist for anything they did. I can tell you right now, we wouldn't have done that here. But is that what killed him, or is it? Well, and I think aware,
that right. But again, we can't stress enough as a group, as a whole, that the training and the ability to train takes money, and to try to defund goes to the very heart of eliminating what citizenry think, is the issue. And again, law enforcement is saying, yes, we need money to retrain. We need money to train. We recognize that techniques, maybe in a life-threatening incident, is going to be, hey, we just need to come out of this so that we can proceed, more or less. And that's going to be a different situation than standard. You're 80 to 90% of what you see as officers in law enforcement, And
again, I'm going to liken to our department what we're doing right now. We're about to send all these people out that haven't been on the streets in years, and their only training was a 4-hour class with a bunch of videos and how to do a felony stop, how to do this, how to do that. And I'm like, okay, I know I haven't been on the streets in about 4 or 5 years in a police car. I could run an MDT if I had to, a mobile data computer if I needed to. I can do the real job. I can do the job. That's not an issue. That's fine. But all the technical stuff that's going to go with it, I have no clue. A 4-hour class isn't going to help that. We need hands-on training for these guys to go back out there and do this job again, and it's going to be a disaster.
It's also,
and I'm very fearful.
People need to understand the importance of continuity in law enforcement. Having an officer who works a beat on a regular basis, day in and day out, is invaluable. Yep. The old expression was learn how to read the streets, learn how to read the streets. What you have to do is you have to learn who belongs where, when, who do we know? I got to keep an eye on that guy, that gal over there. She's not a problem. That level of experience in some point in time, we started calling this community policing, and we acted like it was a brand new idea. Good law enforcement has been doing community policing for as long as we've had law enforcement, and that's critical. Constant turnover, constant moving of people from one sector to another, from one assignment to another, hinders that. It makes it very difficult for cops to get to know the communities that they're serving. And that's, to me, that is the most important aspect of law enforcement in a nutshell, knowing the people you're serving. It solves so many problems and it avoids so many other problems, but we don't, and you said money, Steve, it not only requires money, it requires a level of commitment to that attitude right there. Community policing is not a concept. It's not a division. It's not a section of an organization. It is a state of mind that has to be adopted organizationally, top to bottom.
Well, and just in again, a microcosm of support to that. When we worked in committee, and 20 years later, knowing what's in front of each other made it very easy to congregate. Yeah, maybe I had to get, our section of the state bar to buy in. It wasn't very difficult. Maybe you had to get these appropriate law enforcement agencies and associations to come with you as well. But because we had the continuity, we brought things together, and then we've moved through these things. Again, it does take time and commitment to the effort at hand to truly want to make the strides that we're proposing. And if you don't do that, and again, I know the legislature in Texas looks to have interim studies so that they keep continuity between legislative sessions to therefore then work on things. But when you insert things that become important to the community and to the members, if you don't have that continuity and aren't working in concert, you don't get the best public policy either.
In the meantime, if you look at anecdotes, if you look at those handful of cases you're talking about, and start trying to craft public policy based upon those, you make bad choices. I was told this week, I haven't read the bill yet, but I'm told there's a bill that's now been filed that would make it illegal for cops to profile motorcycle groups based upon the jackets that they're wearing, the colors that they're wearing. Okay. Think about that a second. Now, I haven't been on the streets a lot longer than even Doug has, but back when I started out in my career, we had major problems with motorcycle gangs. They were criminal syndicates. Okay. Some of them even called themselves that. And their colors, their jackets would tell you a lot about them. The different patches that they would put on, what color the patch was, whether the patch was upside down or not, would advertise what types of crimes they had committed, whether or not they killed the victim in the telling cops you're no longer allowed to look at that evidence, to look at that as part of your decision-making process. That sounds like a really bad idea. Again, I haven't read the bill yet, but it sounds like one of those knee-jerk reactions to something that just is gonna lead to disaster for our law enforcement officers. Maybe.
Well, simply put, if and it's about to be baseball season, if I squared a bunt, you better believe the first baseman and third baseman are going to come in from 90 feet to about 60 feet. Why? Because the circumstances are predicting that I'm trying to lay a bunt down, and one of those guys are going to have to get to it, cover the bag, and make a play. If I take that out, you would say, as a manager of a baseball team, what the heck are you doing? I need to see and know that those things depict a certain thing that is about to occur.
Right.
And if you took that ability away from somebody, you'd create chaos.
It would be telling the quarterback you cannot audible at the line of scrimmage because you sent somebody in motion and a defender followed them. So now you know they're in man-to-man. So you have to audible out of that play that you thought was designed for,
You do it everywhere else. That's why it would be, especially when you want law and order and you want to create public safety, that is a clue. That is a tip that would advise you to what comes next.
Right.
Anyway, I think that's a pretty good place to stop. And I want the viewers to recognize this is not easy to get through all these things. We just don't sit down and say, we're going to make it through. If the conversations and the discussions come and a point has to get 30 minutes to really be expanded and expound upon, we want to do that because it's those nuances. And as I think we've said too, some of the devil, is in the detail. If you don't get into the detail, you'll gloss over these things and you'll say it doesn't make a difference. What we're here to do is to say the detail does make a difference. And we want to show it. Whatever law enforcement and attorneys come up with, at least we want to present more accuracy on both sides. Now, what legislative bodies do with this information, we can't tell you. That's an elected official. They make decisions a little bit differently than this group will. We understand that. No, nonetheless, we want to be participatory in finding solutions and getting information to you so you recognize when someone just grabs statistics and then they run off to legislative council or they want to create an amendment or put something together. If you have some background to what you're using, you usually come up with better policy. I attempted to do that with Kevin in the early 2000s and then continue to work and at least keep one foot in the law enforcement and criminal justice world enough to then have something like this, along with the legal background and others throughout the state, to find solutions that work for Black, white, yellow, green, red, whatever affiliation you want to have with your significant others and beyond. Because I think we're all part of this great state of Texas and we need to make progress. Whether it's 13 or 53, we'd like those numbers reduced if at all possible.
Agreed.
Yeah, we all would.
Hey, I want to say something real quick because my audio was going. If you didn't notice, I was fidgeting and trying to get my Bluetooth connect, and yeah, and so you guys all hit on the highlights and hit on the points, and I think Doug hit it best on the statistics, and Clay said the same thing. The statistics on all this stuff don't add up. If you go through the percentages of how many contacts an officer has over his career, or the percentages of large agencies have over their years, and the amount of contact, whether it's a shooting or putting hands on, is so minimal. It is so minimal. You're taking, what happens is you're taking a snapshot of a bad situation and you're exploiting it, and that's what happens in police work. You exploit a bad situation and you don't look at the 1.7 million reasons for contact that officers had in Dallas in 2020, and then you look at one incident, and that's what happens to our society, and that's just policing. We're judged by that one situation that went bad, not the million other ones plus that went great, and that's a narrative that we have to live with. And Stephen, you being on here, understanding it more and more every single time we do this, really is a release point for many of us. So you get to actually hear real work by real cops. And I know that some of the guys say, "Well, I haven't been on the job in a while, or I haven't been out there in a while." I have. Yesterday morning before I came here, I ran warrants, and those situations. I'll give you one situation.
Well, people have died doing that in the last year. Rest in peace, the gentleman in Houston. So it is a dangerous scenario. It's
a very dangerous scenario. I'll give you the situation. We had to go arrest a guy that had sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl. And so you think he wants to go to jail? Hell no, he don't want to go to jail. And when he sees us coming up, what does he do? When he opens the door, he's like, "Oh, damn, that's the police." He tries to shut the door and he puts his right hand behind his back. Okay, most cops, they would have smoked him, right? And rightfully so. You got a warrant, you got a hard address, you got a great warrant at that, and you got a furtive gesture of him putting that arm behind his back. Our team pushed through there, push him down, take him into custody. Now, was that situation work every single time? Absolutely not. That situation turns into a complete shit show right there at the door where he gets smoked, or he tries to smoke one of us. Did he have anything behind his back? Nope. Not a damn thing, just being a jerk off. And that's what happens in society of making a bad decision. His actions put us there. His actions at the door made us have our actions. And so when people look at that and they're like, geez, those guys were militarized and they were coming through that door and they
what would the headline have been in the paper?
Yeah. What would the headline have been? Let's see, there was 8 of us, and out of the 8, 6 are white, 2 are African American. White officers go into an address and kill a man that had unarmed. Not to mention that BK, who was holding the shield, is African American, or Chelsea, who was the point guard at Baylor, where all those championships, is on my team. And no one would ever mention those 2 were on that team. Not one of them. They would have said, these white cops went into that room and smoked this guy because he was unarmed. That's all it would have said.
He was on his way to Bible study the whole time. That's all he was
we had a shooting here in Houston just last week. I made the scene. One of our officers is sitting with a suspect in the back seat. A car being chased by other officers pulls up. The guy jumps. He had wrecked it. He jumps out, goes to carjack a lady, and there's a baby in the back seat. Nobody knew about the baby in the back seat. The officer jumps out of the car, runs over, sees him with a gun, draws down on him, tells him, drop it, drop it, drop it. He shoves the lady into the car, jumps in, throws it in reverse, hits a patrol unit, comes back up. He comes up with a gun. The officer shoots 3 rounds, shoots him in the chest. The baby in the back seat, who he never saw, gets hit in the head. Okay. It grazed, took part of the skull out, but the baby's going to be okay. The headline the next morning, officer shoots baby.
And on the radio, because I heard it.
I was so pissed off because I was on that scene. I knew exactly what happened. That officer was devastated that baby got hurt. He was doing everything he could. The baby was up. They were holding him. They keep showing it, and the headline was, officer shoots baby, suspect dead. That's all they put out there. I called the station. I was livid because that is not what that officer gets home in the morning, and that's the first thing he sees. Everybody thinks he's a piece of crap because he shot a baby. Had no idea the baby was in the backseat. Zero.
Well, I think this, and it's small.
I know.
However, it's a way to have a different perspective and end game of why we're doing what we're doing. And it's got to get reinforced because everything else that you said has been reinforced the other way for enticement, incitement, division, and all the other bad words that aren't bringing the community together. And it may be one painstaking Facebook Live every Wednesday till someone says, you know what? What everybody was showing me on these 30-second clips or headlines that get me to clickbait or this, that, and the other is now finally being brought to light of what the truth is. Kevin agreeing to be at our, at our town hall meeting. We do have to bring white law enforcement in because if you don't establish a relationship, you're always going to be seen as the bad person. And it takes time because we have been programmed so much by the social media and headlines of going one certain way, one particular way. These 4 white guys here, they can't wait to get you off camera and knock you out. That's not the truth. But if that's your perception of what you thought, because you've been kind of programmed that way sometimes, that's what initially comes to your mind. Your frontal lobe interprets that way. We have to change that.
I have to point this out because there's a provision in the Texas version of the George Floyd Act that would have made if it passed, would make what that officer did a crime, regardless of the officer's intent, the officer's actions, whatever, because it requires an officer before they pull a trigger to make sure they examine for all possible secondary targets. But make sure that
which is impossible.
It's impossible
before you pull the trigger. Which is, they're right. It's impossible. But that's the point we're trying to make is we're trying to enact statutes
Well, but we have to get the staff. We have to, I'm telling you, as the committee director, I understood this because I didn't want unintended consequences based on hyperbole, based on hysteria, and based on a headline. And you knew this, Kevin. And we tried painstakingly to get to the bottom
You're
of
not
it.
a staffer anymore, Steve.
Well, we certainly have ways to get the staff, and hopefully someone is recognizing we're trying to point these things out to create good public policy. And I think that's what you said from the beginning.
Now, guys.
So,
Man.
well, I think we've run our course for today. And again, these things need to be pointed out. We're not sugarcoating anything. We're going to delve into things that people may not want or feel comfortable about, but they must be brought to light because people are using the fact that those things aren't in the public to steer things in a way that may be beneficial for a small group of people. And I'm not even talking about folks that want to have monetary gains in the civil courts or law enforcement, but there are people that have nothing to do with the situations that enjoy ratings and different things because of scenarios that go on throughout our state. And I get that, and they have a right to be capitalist and do their jobs and present things. But again, public policy is not going to and shouldn't be based on 5, 6, 9, and 10 o'clock news.
Agreed.
Amen.
Guys, I got to go.
All right. We'll see
Amen.
y'all next week. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys.
I'll take
All
care.
right.